Hey all. Well, it's Thursday. Sorry. It took me a few more days than I anticipated to get to making this. Those first few days, weather was absolutely gorgeous, and the laundry list I had of stuff I wanted to do that was backlogged from having such horrendous weather this winter. Yeah, we're pretty exhausted in our household, but we got it a lot done. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed your beautiful days and you are not enjoying this bad weather, heavy rain, thunderstorms that we're currently experiencing. So let's get into social psychology. This chapter unit starts on 643, and honestly, it's one of my favorites. Social psychology, the book, it defines it in a very specific manner. It's the scientific study how we think about influence and relate to one another. And I want to really emphasize that scientific, because it's different than cultural anthropology or sociology or like some of these other fuzzy social sciences. Social sciences and psychology is more science based. When we think about sociology and social sciences, they're fuzzy. This tries to bridge that gap, look at the relation between one another, and at the same time try to identify and study it scientifically when we're using things that can be studied, can be observed, can be measured, and most importantly, can be replicated or duplicated. Now, this is actually kind of odd to teach to a computer. I know I've done it a few times before, but there's a delay in what I see on the camera in front of me and what I'm actually doing, so it's kind of throwing me off. So if I seem a little hesitant, it's because my mouth on the screen is not matching up to my mouth as it moves. So I'm kind of weirded out by that. So, all right. What it comes down to is social psychology comes down to why do we study it? Well, why even bother to all these social interactions? Doesn't have to do with just the individual dealing with another individual or a situation or the culture or the country where they're living or the persuasions or beliefs of the individual? Does it come down to religiosity and other types of ideological beliefs? What does it come down to? Well, it comes why we study social psychology comes down to the innate desire to want to understand how people react, how people think, um, to derive meaning from their actions in their thoughts and how they verbalize, and so we can derive and predict patterns of thought and action. Remember, we're human beings. We do not like things that aren't predictable. We like to be able to predict what things are going to happen. How are people going to react? We like that boring monotony of predictability. When it's not there, it gives us anxiety, it gives us pause, and at the same time, it kind of makes us feel as if the world is unpredictable. It gives us an external locus of control. We don't like that. We like internal locuses of control. We like to believe that we, and we alone, have the ability to predict what's going to happen in the world. What's going to happen with our interactions, with our relationships with other people. We like having that sense of certainty. It's a sense, not reality. And we look at this because we're always trying to derive the patterns in behavior. And I've talked about this a lot. I know, guys. But this chapter, this unit, ties it all up in a bow. A lot of things I've been talking about all year kind of get brought in and tied into a nice little bow at the end. Now, when we do these sort of things, when we try to attribute um, behaviors, when we try to find these correlations, these patterns, right? We attribute the behavior. It's like, okay, this person acted irrationally. They are one, mentally ill, two, they're angry, three, yeah, I don't want to be around that person. we compartmentalize when we see things, right? So this is called attribution theory. Let's read it out of the book here on top of 645. The theory that we explain someone's behavior by crediting either the situation or the person's disposition. So, all right, Mr. Krause goes to Kroger and I steal a loaf of bread. Why did I steal the loaf of bread? Well, one thing you could say is that, well, Mr. Krause is a criminal. He is a criminal, and he has a criminal mind, and he is predisposed to criminal behavior. Now, this would be what? By crediting either the situation or the person's disposition. This would be disposition. You're crediting my behavior, my stealing of something, towards my disposition. I have a criminal disposition. The other token is you could say, well, Mr. Krause must be like destitute, broke, and poor, and wanting to just feed his children. And although he committed a criminal act, it's okay. You attributed it to the situation. Let's look at another thing. A person is approached and assaulted in the middle of the night. There's nobody around. And the person is armed and he's being assaulted and he's fearing for his life, and he takes out his gun and he shoots the perpetrator, the person attacking him. Is he a murderer? Well, person's disposition. Is he a murderer? What could make him a murderer? Let's say the attacker was a minority, right? And let's say the person being attacked was Caucasian. And this Caucasian person who was attacked, has a long history, public history, of being racist, of belonging to racist groups, of being at racist group rallies, of being presidents of organizations that are racist in their scope. Now, is he a murderer? Is it his disposition to want to kill somebody looking like the person he shot? Or is it situational? That he was being assaulted and felt fear of his life, and so took the life of another individual. It's not a clear-cut case at all. And that's one of the things about social psychology. We try to get to the core of what is behind some behavior that seems completely unnatural. Let's just put it that way. Now, attribution theory, this is what we do. We try to attribute it to the disposition or the behavior of the person, or the situation of the person. This is how we're trying to make sense of their behavior. Now, let's look at what most of the time people make. When we assume people's intentions or disposition, we are working with what? Second, third hand information. A lot of it based on stereotype. Are you going to make mistakes? Am I going to make mistakes? Are you going to make mistakes? Is everyone going to make mistakes? Yes. We're constantly making mistakes. This is called a fundamental attribute. I'm going to say distributional. I'm thinking too much APHG. I'm getting swamped by these freshmen. Fundamental attribution error. The book says, the tendency for observers when analyzing another's behavior to underestimate the impact of the situation and to overestimate the impact of personal disposition. Now, let me find my notes again, because they fell. But fundamental attribution error, the effects of the attribution, let's look at it this way. Fundamental attribution error. You see a homeless person. Do you think they are homeless because they are lazy? Is it their disposition? Do you know the person enough to make that assumption? That they are actually lazy and that is the reason for their homelessness. Or is the reason for their homelessness, let's say, mental illness? Let's say they were a veteran and they came down with a mental illness and then they were received a dishonorable discharge and don't receive any benefits or medical care from the government because of their mental illness. A lot of these people end up homeless. At the same time, could that homeless person actually be lazy? Yeah. But when we make such rash decisions based upon stereotypes, we're bound to make errors, overgeneralizations, and quite honestly, really make some horrific assumptions about people. Now, and when we make fundamental attribution errors, it's like, okay, we just discuss a homeless person, right? Let's look at a rich individual, a person who has lots and lots and lots of money, right? A beautiful house, power, and prestige. Do they have intelligence? Do you make that assumption? And why do you? Is it because of what you learned in the intelligence unit? Is it because that smart people are rich and not so smart people are poor? Is this a fundamental attribution error? Most of the time, yes. All right. Let's take a little bit of a look at the textbook here. The effects of attribution, guys. The point to remember are attribution to individuals' dispositions or to their situations should be made carefully. They have real consequences. Yes, you treat people differently. You see a homeless person, you might not think, wow, that person had gotten a car wreck and didn't have health insurance. And basically the hospital bills bankrupt them. And now they're homeless. You think, oh, that person is just so lazy. Why can't they just go get a job? We have to be very careful because what we decide as our attribution to their behavior and their situation, we act on that. We act on that. That's why a lot of times when you do see a homeless person, right, even if they are a legit homeless person or not, because quite honestly, there are a lot of people panhandling, especially in the city, that are not homeless. A lot of times, if they are a veteran, they will call attention to that. They will say, I am not lazy, or they will say, we'll work for food. We'll work for money. Why these homeless people hold these signs is to preempt your fundamental attribution error. Is to say, this person's homeless. They're lazy. Oh wait, they're holding a sign saying that they'll work. I guess they're not lazy. I guess they're just down on their luck. And it changes people's perspectives of them, of what their character is. And it also changes how people react to them. How people act with, let's say, empathy and sympathy, or with disdain and as if they don't exist. They lock their door, waiting at the light. They stand ahead. They look straight ahead at the light. Or they take out their phone and pretend that they have a phone call and they just start talking on it, which is actually one of my favorites to observe people doing. It's like that's kind of like dangerous to do while you drive, and you're pretending to do that instead of actually engage with another person who is 6 feet away from you. It tells us a lot about our society. Now, all right. Our attitudes affect our actions. The central route persuasion attitude change path in which interested people focus on the arguments and respond with favorable thoughts. Most of the time, guys, people are so entrenched in their thoughts and feelings that they are not open. Interested people focus on the arguments and respond with favorable thoughts. Many times, people have a perspective, even if it's something they know very, very, very little about. They will have a perspective and a ideology to go along with their perspective that they will defend. Despite evidence to the contrary, they will defend it. Why? Internal versus external locus of control. I know about this. I have decided about this. This is my perspective, and this is just the way it is. For many people, that's kinda... yeah. We like believing we're in charge, that we know everything, and many times we know next to nothing. I'm figuring out another thing that's weird about this camera thing. When you're looking at the mirror in yourself, remember we in the unit on appearances and visuals, that we find mirror images of ourselves more attractive than our actual true image of ourselves because of seeing ourselves in the mirror. The video camera doesn't make a mirror image. It makes a opposite image, I suppose. It's not mirror, it's actually true to life. And so it's actually really messing me up a little bit. This is probably why I'm gesturing with my left hand, because I'm used to gesturing with my right. But when I see myself on the camera, that just looks odd to me. I don't know. It's Thursday, it's break, I get it. I'm right there with you. So, alright. The peripheral route persuasion, attitude change path in which people are influenced by incidental cues such as a speaker's attractiveness. Now, this happens all the time. This happens in sales. This happens in commercials. This happens where the message is important. They're trying to persuade you to have an idea or to buy something. And they'll put it in a person who is not only attractive, but is non-threatening. So this way, you don't get your guard up about yourself, and in turn, get to guard up about their product. And at the same time, if you find a person attractive, you can thereby find the associated product to that person attractive as well. That's why they don't find the most unattractive people in the world to sell things on TV or car ads or car shows or anything where there's a lot of attractiveness and little content and they're trying to get you to buy something. Actions affect attitudes. Foot in the door phenomenon. This is really cool. This is actually really, really, really cool. The foot in the door phenomenon is a lot of times used most of the time today. If it's not something horrific like killing lots of people or committing crimes, it's sales. This is high pressure sales. What a salesperson might say is like, oh, I see you're here to buy a car. Are you interested in buying a car? Are you interested in cars? Are you interested in any of the models here? And what they're trying to do is get to yes. Once you say, oh yes, I'm very interested in a car. You go, oh really? Are you interested in this car? This model car? I didn't ask you what kind of car you're interested in. Are you interested in this car? Yes, I really do like this type of car. Oh, okay. And it's not very blatant. But through the course of a conversation, or just an interaction or negotiation, getting the other party to say yes, the little tiny things that seem inconsequential. Consequential? Yeah. Actually can have a great impact on the success of your sales. If you're buying something major, let's say like a car, a lot of times they'll offer you a refreshment, like, would you like a cup of coffee? Oh yeah, sure, I would love one. Oh, okay. Well, what would you like in it? Oh yeah, I'd like this, and then they bring it to you. Oh, thank you. It builds up this strange rapport where you start saying yes to a lot of things and are actively discouraged by the environment to say no to things. And the more often you say yes to small things, they can build that up incrementally until you're saying, yes, I will buy that car. For instance, I shared with you guys the other week the story of my parents getting scammed for $3,500 by this travel discount program. And they actually used this same technique, this kind of foot in the door. They went to the sales presentation and asked my mom, like, do you want to travel one day? Do you have a dream trip that you would like to go on? And my mom's like, oh yeah, I would love to go to Alaska and take this train ride and this cruise and yada 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 and all this other stuff. And he goes, oh, well, I have a product for you. Would you be interested if I could get you that trip for half price? My parents went, yes. And well, what other types of trips are you looking for? Do you have a family? Would family be coming? No, no, it would just be us. Oh, okay. And my parents just divulge all this information in which they turn on their head. And all of a sudden, my parents forked off $3,500 for a promise of, and it was an invalid promise, of cheaper travel benefits. They actually got no product in return for $3,500. But it's that foot in the door phenomenon. They had to work over my parents over the course of an hour, but they got to that yes. They got to $0. We're not going to spend a dime when we walk in there. To yes, we'll sign the dotted line for $3,500. It's very effective. Many times it's these incremental demands. It could be used kind of innocuously towards selling you something you don't really want, selling you a car, to getting to yes, to closing the sale. But they can also be used for some truly horrendous things. Things such as crimes against humanity, the Holocaust, stuff like that. I mean, the Nazi Party didn't come to power saying, Hitler wasn't up there saying, if you appoint me chancellor, I will eliminate all the Jews of Europe. I will build camps in Poland where we ship people there and we gas them, and I will have a systematic destruction of the Jewish people. No. No. It was incremental. It was incremental, and it wasn't just incremental over a year or two. It was incremental over 12 years. 12 years. It's a very, very interesting story. The book alludes to it. This book right here, Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning. Great book. Great book. It was really, in Holocaust and Genocide Studies, it was groundbreaking when it came out. Because when we deal with extremes and types of behavior like that, where people have been manipulated to do crazy things which and otherwise they wouldn't have never have done, like my parents buying this thing for $3,500, or people randomly just going in to check out a car and then coming home with a new one. These things happen. All of a sudden, these people, these ordinary men, and they were ordinary men. They were middle-aged. They were reserve policemen. Basically, they were just average Joes that got called up into service. They were postmen. They were fathers. They were husbands. They were just normal guys that kind of got wrapped up in this whole Holocaust thing. And the book makes the good point that at no point did anybody kind of go, hold up, we're not doing this. We're not doing this. In the social situation, and also this kind of foot in the door effect, can be used to great effect to commit these horrific acts of violence. For instance, my own thesis, I said, and this was pretty much the conclusion of my thesis, the point of Nazi-era propaganda wasn't to make the German people into bloodthirsty killers who would chant and cheer the evacuation of the Jewish residents out of their town. It just had to make them indifferent. Just had to make it so, they didn't question it. and that could be done incrementally. And my study actually shows how it was done incrementally. Um, and so you don't need to change people horrendously or to a great effect to have this impact. Um, that's what's so scary about some of this social psychology research, especially when we get into Milgram and Zimbardo, is that people can be affected so greatly um, by so little. That we all have this capacity for extreme ugliness within us. But before I bring you down too much, this foot in the door effect also has a positive impact, and that could be expanding social attitudes towards, especially in recent memory, towards minorities in our country. When we look at the civil rights movement and attitudes towards integration throughout our country. If we go back to right after Brown, the Brown decision, the country was deeply divided. Let's just put it that way, right? Um, but if we looked 10 years past Brown, was it less divided? 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Was the country less divided on this issue of integration? Definitely. Definitely. Basically, the foot in the door was that social change was happening. And it opened up people's minds to really challenging these long held beliefs that, perhaps this is okay. And they can let go of this. To let go of their own personal belief of the world, that internal locus of control, and to allow this external viewpoint come into them, and they re-internalize it as their internal locus of control, their internal view of the world. This gives them peace and accepting a new social construction. This gives them peace at accepting it and feeling okay with it. And we've had that happen actually during Ural's life so far. If we look at initiatives like gay marriage and or marriage equality in our country, if we look back to like stats from the 1990s, the support numbers for marriage equality or gay marriage was extremely, extremely, extremely low. Extremely low. When we look at the policies of the country with Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it was like, yeah, you can be homosexual, but we don't want to know about it. We don't want to see it. We don't want to hear about it. We're barely going to even, admit that you exist in the military. To now, well, that's no longer the case. Don't Ask, Don't Tell doesn't exist anymore. And at the same token, same-sex spouses are actually, they are recognized within the military, which is a huge, huge change from 10 or 20 years ago. When we look at the stats and the numbers, the approval numbers were like 10%, something like that, 20 years ago, to somewhere in the 30%, to like the 50 and 60% where we are now. Things change. The foot in the door thing happens. And it happens with exposure. For instance, let's go back to the integration story. Basically how it went down was Caucasian, white, people were afraid that African Americans being admitted to the same schools would change their children, that it would be a degenerate active force on their children. It would screw up their kids. They were afraid. But when it happened, and then nothing happened to our kids, the kids were the same. The parents got to meet some of these kids they saw as the other, and their viewpoint was changed. Their viewpoint was changed for those individuals living perhaps in their town. Individuals living outside their town, that would take more time to fix those perspectives. So, role playing. And we're not going to go all the way through to reading with this, guys. I took a look at it. I'm going to intersperse some videos and stuff like that into this. I'll add it in post-production, whatever I do, and I'll put the links in the video itself. So just right-click and then open a new window so you don't X me out in the corner. But I guess it would be that corner for you all. That's so strange. Anyway, role-playing. What's your role? Who are you? How do you see yourself? How do you construct who you are in your place in society? And do you change? Do you change how you act to fit those expectations? How do you see yourself and others? How everyone should behave? Do you get senioritis because you are a senior? Because it is your role? Or does your role as a senior permit you to be lazy and then claim it to be senioritis? It's a slippery slope, right? For instance, the role-playing. If you are, quote-unquote, like the smart kid, are you going to start all of a sudden acting out and be the funny, disruptive kid? No, you know your role. You know what comes with it. You know the expectations of it, and you know how it's viewed socially. It brings you certainty, having a concrete role in this world. We don't like to switch up, most of us don't like switching up our roles and who we are and what our values are every other day or every other month. That's confusing. It causes cognitive and personal dissonance, and actually can lead to some emotional strife, anxiety, and other maladies. We avoid those types of things if at all possible. That's why some long-held beliefs take a long time to fade away. Now, this role here, they talk about the Zimbardo experiment. The Zimbardo experiment is also called the Stanford Prison Experiment. I will be putting actually a video probably somewhere down here, a link to a little bit of a documentary on it. It's not long. I didn't pick anything that's over 20 minutes. And it's going to basically run you through the Zimbardo experiment. The Zimbardo experiment was huge because it all depended on the roles of those people. And inside the experiment, it was a fake prison where people were brought in and assigned at random, if they would be a prisoner or a guard. And based upon their perceived role, this is what the experiment says. They started acting out in more and more extreme forms of behavior, and to the point where the guards were actually physically and emotionally abusing the prisoners. And it showed, Zimbardo was trying to make the point that our social roles are constructed and we are influenced by them, and we can be influenced to them to such extremes in such a short amount of time. Many of the social psychologists of his era in 1970 and before were trying to come up with rational explanations of why the Holocaust happened. In that, Zimbardo's kind of claim to fame was just kind of like people can become evil very, very quickly. Even people who have no predisposition towards it. At the same time, there is a lot of criticism of his research techniques. Number one, because you could not do a social experiment like this today. It kind of violates all the rules. And at the same time, there's also some validity issues as far as his own experiments, including the Stanford experiment. And I'll put a link to that discussion in there as well. Someone wrote a really good critique of his experiment, and I think it should be noted because Zimbardo has become over time less and less important of a huge milestone, but at the same time we can't just throw it all out, because there is there is that kernel of truth in there. that we're all looking for. All right. The cognitive dissonance, relief from tension. The cognitive dissonance here, guys, is, let me read the definition. The theory that we act to reduce the discomfort we feel when two of our thoughts are inconsistent. For example, when our awareness of our attitudes and our actions clash, we can reduce the resulting dissonance by changing our attitudes. Earlier in the year, I used the example of, someone who's really racist. It's like, let's say, I don't like Germans. I don't like Germans at all. I think they are all evil. Except Hans. Hans is a really good accordion player. And he's an okay guy. But all Germans are really, really bad. Hans isn't really German. I think he might be Austrian or something. But, yeah. I had cognitive dissonance. I like Hans. I think he's a good accordion player. I hate Germans. So what do? I make up some kind of middle ground where both things can exist. Both my attitudes and beliefs can exist at the same time, curing my cognitive dissonance. If I didn't cure the cognitive dissonance, I would both hate and like my friend at the same time. Yeah. We just cure our cognitive dissonance automatically, guys. And we do it through rationality. Basically, it causes us discomfort, and so we rationalize our beliefs of one way or the other. Now, the cognitive dissonance they use in a book was an interesting one, I thought. It was talking about the run-up to the Iraq War. And I was I was in grad school at the time, and I was heavily into the news cycle. And I would watch news a lot. And actually what the book describes in here, and what I was studying, which was a lot of the social manipulation and ideological mobilization, foot in the door, how do you get people to believe a certain thing, and I was watching it live on my TV with the invasion of Iraq. At the beginning it was like, oh, Saddam Hussein was involved with 9/11, and once people were kind of like, no. And they were like, oh, wait, hold on. He has weapons of mass destruction, and he's plotting to use them on the United States at any moment. We are in grave threat. What was hilarious is, like, I knew enough, my professors knew enough, that the weapons he had at one time, he actually was given them by the United States. He was given chemical weapons agents by the United States. That's why we knew he had them. Because we gave them to him to use against the Iranians during the Iranian-Iraq War in the early 80s. At the same time, they had all been destroyed. We probably knew that too, which is why we never found any in Iraq. Once we invaded Iraq, and the whole 9/11 thing with Saddam Hussein being involved somehow, that all blew away. Because, Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein are best buddies, being different strains of Islam, and Saddam Hussein was not a very good Muslim by pretty much all accounts. Now, when no weapons of mass destruction were found, because people were like, as much as like CNN right now is fixated on finding that lost plane and having like nonstop coverage, that's the way the coverage was finding weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It was every hour, what did they find? What did they find? What did they find? And it was nothing. And people were going, hold up, hold the phone. We were kind of misled here. And then it changed. The discussion changed again. It went from 9/11 to weapons of mass destruction to he's an evil man, and this is verbatim by our president. He's an evil man, and we need to bring democracy and freedom to the people of Iraq. We are liberating them. That's why the whole invasion was called Operation Iraqi Freedom. Yeah, not Operation Find Weapons of Mass Destruction, Operation he's a bad dude and was responsible for 9/11 too, but it was Operation Iraqi Freedom. It was spun on its head again. Because, well, how can any American, be against freedom and democracy? So it caused a lot of dissonance, cognitive dissonance for a lot of people in our country, including myself. I was like, okay, this is the third or fourth story I've gotten. Our Secretary of State, Colin Powell, went before the UN and lied. I don't know what to think, and that's honestly, a personal story of mine, that's when I pulled the plug on the TV. Because I'm like, I can't believe anything is on there. And following it all the time, and just to find out what I was following was not really even true, caused me a lot of cognitive dissonance in what I truly believe or not. Anyway, but that's cognitive dissonance. It's kind of weird. I look green when I do this, and I turn back to pink. Yeah, probably the green wall back there. The book also talks about Milgram. Milgram's another one of those experiments that could not be done today. I'll post 2 links to it. One shows some, it basically is a good overview of the experiment itself. Another one's like a modern one, a recreation done on ABC News. It's short. It's only about 6 minutes, the second one. But what the guy says in the end is so telling. I can only imagine, I can only hope that it wasn't scripted. With Milgram, it's the electric shock experimentation that the book even goes into it. Let me read some of the things. You'll read it too, and I hope you really take note of it. Conditions that strengthen conformity to act, like in the Milgram experiment. One is made to feel incompetent or insecure. Basically, people feel, if you feel incompetent or insecure, then you have a weak internal locus of control, and you are looking for a strong locus of control to tell you where to go, to tell you what to do. It's going to bring you certainty. The group has at least 3 people. The group is unanimous. Everybody thinks and acts the same. One admires the group status and attractiveness. Their status. They have attractiveness. In the Milgram experiment, the group that was able to influence these individuals, well, they were wearing lab coats. It was a university laboratory. It was prestigious. People were walking around with PhDs and clipboards. One has made no prior commitment to any response. They don't have an opinion, so they can get their newly formed opinion or belief from the group. Others in the group observe one's behavior. And they keep each other in check, and if someone steps out of line, they call them on it. This binds and builds social conformity because nobody wants to be called out. Because then you're not part of the group, you are part of the other. One's culture strongly encourages respect for social standards. Now, behavior like this, conformity. With Milgram, it was incremental electroshocks on individuals, and were many times it was noted that the person would administer an electroshock, and then the subject would actually scream out, and the person eventually would actually get kind of disconcerted and worried about it, and they would look back at the researcher, and the researcher would be like, keep going, next question, and not looking alarmed, sitting in their lab coat in close proximity. Ask the next question. And they just kept on doing it. Milgram comes under a lot of suspicion too, because Milgram did actually this set of experiments a lot. And he was actually trying to decipher the elements that need to be in place to get the most extreme result. So he didn't, oh, this is Milgram Experiment 1, Milgram Experiment 8, Milgram Experiment 10. No, he only published one, but he chose the most extreme, calling into account all the influences he believed that made the reaction stronger. At the same token, both Zimbardo and Milgram showed that everyday individuals put into extraordinary situations and under certain controlled environments could produce some extremely horrific things. It gave a better explanation to atrocities such as by the Nazis than just they are evil people. It actually is a little bit more disconcerting than that, because the findings in Zimbardo and Milgram really point to that any one of us is actually capable of doing any of these types of atrocities given the correct social conditioning and also environment. We are not as solid of individuals as we think. We are very malleable as to our approaches and to our thoughts. Think about the example I've used before in class with Buchel, a student at Buchel versus a student at Manual. If we took a kid who got in trouble from Buchel, took him out of that Buchel classroom, and put him into a Manual classroom, would he start behaving like a Manual student? And most of you would have said, yes. He'll be surrounded by this environment, and it does things, and they'll just conform, and that's what we're talking about. And at the same token, if we take a Manual student just like you, and we take you out, and we put you in Buchel, where you kind of go into survival mode, will your behavior change? Will your social expectations change? Will your work ethic change? You know the answer. It will. So, begs the question, and we've asked this and talked about it before in class, are kids who just end up at Buchel less lucky than the ones who end up at Manual? A lot of it has to do with social conformity in their environment, both at home and their school. Also, what roles they choose to live their lives. Which roles have they chosen for themselves, and what roles have been ascribed to them and defined to them by society and by people of authority. If someone labels a child as a troublemaker and some kid who needs special ed in 3rd grade just because they don't like the kid, is that going to stigmatize it and change the course of their life for the rest of their life? It has a good chance of doing it. But at the same token, if a kid is well liked and performs pretty well, and the teachers just love them, do they stand a good chance at being very successful in school? Yes. Environment, social perception, the roles we choose for ourselves, and the roles in which we are permitted to become by our parents and by our social environment, our community. These are very, very important, and they define who we become ultimately and our success in everything from school to life. So it's not just working hard, it's working hard at who you feel you should be. And whether it's that one kid who's, focusing on football and baseball, and that is their thing. Then they have defined who they are. And when you define you are a baseball player and a football player, you have difficulty. I'm not saying it's impossible. You have difficulty in most environments saying, I'm also an academic. At the same token, if you're a YPass kid, or if you're an MST, and if you're an MST kid and you're just kind of like, okay, I'm also a wrestler. Is that kind of odd? In most schools, yes. In our school, Not so much, and I think that's what really makes it special, is that the social stratification in our school really isn't as apparent as in most schools. Most kids need to ask one another what magnet they're in. They don't just assume. It isn't clear as day. And I think that's a really good thing. Let's finish this up. Conformity, conditions that strengthen conformity, and reasons for conformity. The normative social influence resulting from a person's desire to gain approval or avoid disapproval. Basically, this is the kind of social chameleon. I'm gonna blend in so I don't stick out. Hold on one second. Yes, Cheeky? Oh, you're looking for Mama? Mama's not down here. Sorry. So this is a kind of social chameleon thing where you blend into the environment. Where that, if you have a group of friends and let's say you're on a sport and the people you hang out with who play the sport are all wearing Sperry's, you might find yourself wanting to buy a pair of Sperry's just to fit in, just to conform. And there's nothing really wrong with that as long as you are aware of it. But be aware this is a huge social influence on your life, and especially as teenagers. Informational social influence. Influence resulting from one's willingness to accept others' opinions about reality. Informational social influence. Now, believe it or not, that's my role. When we look at when it says here, when we accept others' opinions about reality, we are responding to informational social influence. I'm providing you information about how psychology, about how society, about how groups interact with each other. By informing you, I'm influencing you. So that's what I'm doing, guys. It's kind of strange, but I'm in the influence teaching business. So, watch the Milgram, watch the Zimbardo. If you find anything else cool out there, post it. I'm going to stop right there. Okay? People are like, oh God, how much longer is it going to go for? This is 52 minutes right now. Okay? And if you want to follow along, the furthest I went to is 6:57. Okay? So we went from 6:42, was it? This is when typically someone pipes up in the class. Yeah, I believe it's 6:40. Yeah, 6:42, 6:57. This is 15 pages. This is good stuff. Also, it's great to get under our belt over break because there is a good 15 to 30 minutes of video. Believe it or not, there isn't a whole lot left in the chapter. There's some good juicy bits, but there's a lot of stuff that you're going to be like, we've been talking about this for 4 months. Hopefully, you'll feel that way as you read the rest of it. But until then, if you find anything cool, post it. If you have any questions or basically comments, don't leave them below. I'll disable that. But yeah, just post them on Edmodo or anything. Anyway, till then, I will see you all next week. Bye.